Today, we'll be working on the showstopper herself, Xenithrax the Vine Weaver. This is the main centerpiece of the new Heroscape Master Set being released. And this dragon is quite impossible to ignore, both because of its huge presence and vibrant color scheme. Now, I'm going to be walking through the process of painting Xenithrax in the official color scheme, but the beauty of painting your own figures is that you can choose to ignore these instructions and put your own spin on the colors and details of the figure. Renegade asked me to use Army Painter for these videos, and their new Fanatic line is a good place to start for someone who doesn't know where to begin. But honestly, you can use whatever brand works best for you. Now with all that out of the way, let's stop dragging our feet and start painting Xenithrax, the Vine Weaver. First step of any mini you ever paint is to prime the figure. This establishes a firm coat that doesn't rub off and allows the paint to adhere to the model a whole lot better. This whole process may be the subject of a separate video I may make pretty soon, but I used a Zenithal prime on the figure to simulate natural shadows and highlight. Pretty much you paint the whole figure black and then spray directly above with white. So after the prime is fully dried, we'll want to apply what I call an initial undercoat to the whole figure. We'll be using leather brown, which is a nice warm hue to its color, and then we're going to thinly apply it over the whole area of Xenithrax's body. As you'll see later in this video, doing this gives a nice jumping off point for the metallics and yellows that will be used. And if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of curves and angles and areas that you may miss while painting this figure. Adding this color will act as like a shadow for any spots you miss, and look a lot better than spaces of white or black kind of the primer peeking through. And it's just a good bridge or kind of jumping off point to build up to the yellow layer as well. You can use this with an airbrush. I have one and I was tempted to use it, but I wanted to kind of give the full experience to show that it's possible just to do this with brushes. But it is a lot faster with an airbrush, I will say. With the solid brown coat applied, let's start working some yellow into this model. I grabbed some desert yellow, which is a nice tannish colored yellow, as I thought it blended a bit better with the brown base coat. Now for the most part, this follows the same process as before. Use a big brush and fill most of the body in with this color. Try to avoid the metal parts if possible, but if not, it's not the end of the world if you get a bit of yellow onto them, as we'll be layering over them with darker colors later. Make sure you pay attention to the tails, as they have a lot of curves and angles, have spots that are easy to miss. The neck and body armor, I recommend going down to a more smaller detailed brush and fill in the small parts of the armor where the body shows through. Now, if you're not wanting to do that or kind of hesitant about kind of filling in those small spaces, you can just leave those brown and fill them in with metallics. And honestly, the spaces between are so small you probably won't even notice. For this yellow, I do recommend applying about 2 to 3 coats so it's nice and solid. And with each coat, put more emphasis on the top part and not the bottom parts of the model. The base coat is a great way to establish kind of the foundation of your figure. We're essentially kind of blocking in the colors, painting paint by number just to kind of get the basic outline of the model. Now I figure while we wait for the layers to start drying on Xenithrax, we start working on the wings. The wings are definitely an area where the Zenithal highlights are also going to come into play a lot more. I grabbed a mix of Alien Purple and Made Cast Magenta, which has a nice kind of pinkish hue to it, and mix those together at a 1:1 ratio. When you mix paints, kind of use an older brush or the end of your brush so that the paint doesn't get all soaked up in the ferrule of your brush. I added some acrylic medium to the mix to kind of help flow better onto the large wingspan. You can also use water to kind of thin this down to a flowing state. I recommend that you paint both sides kind of individually, paint the top, wait for that to dry, and then flip it over to the back, just so you don't kind of get the paint on your hands or create a bit of a mess while you do this. Again, I probably put about 1 to 2 shades of this just to kind of really get some nice, good coverage, but you know, you can kind of put as many as you like. Now next up, we're going to start adding some definition and character to the yellow parts of the body. You're going to want to grab a dry brush, a decently medium-sized one, and apply a lighter yellow. Now you may be wondering, what is dry brushing and why should you do it for this model? It's a great way to add some highlights and midtones to a model, and as well as adding texture in the process. It works great on feathers, wings, scales, and armor if you want kind of more of a rustic look. Essentially, you want to take a brush with a nice kind of fluffy head. You'll want to dip the dry brush into some paint and remove a lot of the excess. Into like a tissue paper, or you can even use a texture palette. I always recommend testing it on your hand or something else before you apply, because you don't want to apply too much as it will kind of clog up the details. You want to go against the grain of the texture, kind of the opposite direction. If you notice when it's applied, it really kind of brings out the raised and textured surface of the model. Quick and easy way to really make your model stand out with little effort. This is a great and simple technique to have in your toolbox, and one that we'll be using a lot on this model. You'll want to dry brush the wings. Did the same thing again, went along the edges of the feathers, and paid special attention to the kind of the top and tips of the wings to really kind of accentuate that progression downward. You can layer this up a couple times, going to full on wicked pink in the brightest spots, and this is a great way to really make these wings bright and catch the eye. Now we're continuing on through the base coats, and we're going to put some metallics onto the body armor of Xenithrax. Xenithrax does have a very unique color palette for her body armor, and I honestly wasn't able to find an exact match pre-mixed. That's fine, we were able to make our own. I simply took gunmetal and true copper, mixed those together about a 1-to-1 ratio to get kind of a grayish brown looking color, and apply that to all the body armor. You want to be very careful in this step, as this is the kind of outermost base layer, and you don't want that to get into the hard work we did onto the yellow layers beneath. If you do mess up and get it there, you just take your time and see if you're first able to wipe it off. If not, just layer up using the same steps to get back to the point we were at. Use a detail brush and line the inside of the plating if you're ready to separate the yellow and the metallic, and make sure to hit the head and back of the wings as well. If you want to brighten this up, you can mix a bit of plate mail metal in with the copper and dry brush that very carefully onto the metallic part. Now we're going to add some definition to this figure and work on some shading. Heroscape models of old have a heavy wash applied, and we're going to use a similar method to kind of achieve that look. There are different methods of adding shading to a model, but you gotta stick to the classics. For the body and armor, we are going to use a strong tone, which has a nice brown coloring to it. Apply that to the whole model, spreading it out, and making sure to watch out for any pulling or puddling on the model. Note that this is an oil-based wash and will darken the overall appearance of your model. I typically like to apply it after the dry brushes, and then do a light dry brush over the top of it once it's dried, just to brighten the colors back up a bit. On the wings, I used a dark tone to really add some contrast to the bright colors we're using. And again, make sure you have the paint flow downward and not pull up and kind of unseemly splotches or puddles on the model. Wash takes a lot longer to dry compared to other paints, so once you apply it, definitely give it a good amount of time, usually even up to an hour for it to dry. At this point, our model is almost done. Let's get to the hardest part, but the part that really ties it all together, the details. You'll want to shift brushes from kind of this bigger brush we've been using to a more of a fine tip brush. I'm using a size 0 for Monument. And grab some white paint. Now you want your brush to be slightly wet, but not dripping, and the paint to be fluid, but not runny. If it's too runny, it'll kind of flow into the model and clog up the details, and it's a mess to take up. So definitely make sure that there's not much moisture mixed into the paint, but it's mainly held on the edge of the tip of the brush. I always like to test on my hand. My hand is a nature's palette to kind of test the flow and viscosity of the paint to make sure I mixed it properly and there's not any like droplets hanging on. Very carefully trace the eye inside the helmet. What I recommend doing is just trace the outer side and then working your way in. That way you have a bit more room and comfortability for the inner parts and don't have to focus the entire time. If you do make a mistake, remember that all mistakes are fixable. Just layer your paints back up to where the point you got it. Okay, so let's talk about the teeth, which might be the hardest part of the whole figure. But also a very important part in kind of the flow of the colors of the figure. You'll want to take some skeleton bone and apply some thin layers. Take your time and avoid kind of the gap between the teeth and do several layers, kind of brightening up each time for a nice solid coat. Now after a nice solid coat has been applied to the teeth, take some matte white and apply it to the innermost curve of the tooth, applying 1 to 2 coats depending on how bright you want the teeth. This takes a bit of time, and I encourage you not to rush through this process, as the teeth are a main focal point on the model, and if done correctly will really catch the eye. With the white paint fully dried on the eyes, I went through and used some speed paint and filled in the white part. Now I don't use speed paint a lot, I think it's just a different method. And speed paints are a great way to fill in eyes and small details, as the coverage is really consistent and it flows nicely in the small little areas. I also went through and mixed the solder red with a bit of hive purple speed paint and applied that to the tongue and roof of the mouth, as well as kind of the outer gums. You'll want to make sure you do this part before you do the teeth to make sure it doesn't flow and kind of cause a bit of a mess. Now you can paint the base however you like. You can kind of keep it standard, or you can kind of paint it to match the army card or whatever color you please. I went through and flocked it just because I like some texture in the base, but you don't have to do that either. And that's all the steps we kind of have it put together. It's relatively straightforward, as I mentioned before. I just really want to pay attention to the teeth and the eyes. I think that's where the most difficult part is. With a bit of practice and focus, you can really get this done and really just have this absolute unit on the battlefield, laying glyphs and causing general chaos, as dragons are known to do. And thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Your continued support and encouragement really just means the whole world to me. If you have any questions about the painting process, maybe a part you're confused on, or if this video just kind of helped you in the whole process, be sure to let me know. Those comments really help, and honestly, if there's enough questions, I'd love to make a separate video exploring a topic in greater detail. And huge shout out to Renegade for sending me these figures a bit early. It's been great getting some paint on them, and I'm really happy people will have tutorials ready come launch day. And speaking of which, I am an affiliate. If you want to help support the channel, you can click on my affiliate link down in the description and purchase some Heroscape there. It helps the channel out, it doesn't cost you anything extra. And lastly, just encourage you to subscribe for more AOA content, more Heroscape content, and painting tutorials. We got a lot of stuff planned, it's going to be a great time. Well, with the lack of any way to close this video, I'm going to steal my good friend Right Guy's saying and say, you are enough. Thanks so much for watching, and take care.